The morning sun cast long shadows across Westminster Abbey as Catherine Middleton stood before the ancient mirror in her private chambers. Her reflection showed a woman transformed, no longer the university student who had caught Prince William's eye decades ago, but someone destined to wear the crown that had adorned queens for centuries. The weight of the moment pressed upon her shoulders like an invisible cloak. Outside her window, London buzzed with unprecedented energy. Streets that had witnessed countless royal ceremonies now overflowed with people from every corner of the globe. Vendors sold commemorative cups and flags while children waved miniature Union Jacks with infectious enthusiasm. The city had not seen such excitement since the wedding of Charles and Diana, yet this felt different, more mature, more certain of its purpose. William paced nervously in the adjacent room, his military training evident in his measured steps. The man who had flown rescue helicopters and served his country with distinction now faced his greatest mission. His father Charles had ruled for only a brief period before stepping down due to health concerns, leaving William and Catherine to assume the throne much earlier than anyone had anticipated. The Archbishop of Canterbury arrived at dawn, carrying with him not just the ceremonial robes but the weight of tradition spanning over 1,000 years. He had conducted their wedding ceremony years before, but today felt monumentous in its significance. The prayers he would speak had been uttered by his predecessors for generations of monarchs, each word carrying the hopes and dreams of an entire nation. In the kitchen below, staff prepared for what would be remembered as one of the most watched events in modern history. Television crews from around the world had set up their equipment days in advance. Social media buzzed with speculation about Catherine's dress, the guest list, and what this new era would bring to the British monarchy. The guest list read like a who's who of global leadership. Presidents, prime ministers, and royalty from dozens of countries had traveled to witness this historic moment. Yet among all the dignitaries, it was the presence of ordinary citizens that truly mattered. The couple had insisted that representatives from charities they supported, teachers, nurses, and community workers be invited alongside the world's elite. Catherine's mother, Carol Middleton, helped adjust the flowing train of her daughter's coronation gown. The dress, designed by the same team that had created her wedding dress, incorporated symbols from across the Commonwealth nations. Each stitch told a story of unity and hope for the future. The Spencer family tiara, once worn by Diana, caught the morning light as it was carefully positioned on Catherine's head. Prince George, now old enough to understand the significance of the day, stood quietly beside his younger siblings Charlotte and Louis. They had been prepared for months about their roles in the ceremony and the changes that would come to their lives. Their innocence provided a touching counterpoint to the gravity of the occasion. Security teams had worked tirelessly for months to ensure the day would proceed without incident. Every route had been checked, every building secured, and every guest vetted multiple times. The Metropolitan Police coordinated with intelligence services to create an invisible shield around the proceedings while maintaining the pageantry that made such events truly special. As the final preparations began, William took a moment to look out at the crowds gathering along the processional route. These were the people he and Catherine would serve. Teachers rushing to find good viewing spots before school started, elderly couples who remembered previous coronations, young families creating memories that would last lifetimes. Their faces reflected excitement, curiosity, and hope for what this new chapter would bring. The golden coach that would carry them to Westminster Abbey gleamed in the courtyard, its restoration complete after months of careful work by master craftsmen. Every detail had been attended to, from the leather seats to the ornate decorations that would catch the light as they traveled through London's streets. Inside the Abbey, final sound checks echoed through the vast space. The choir had been rehearsing for weeks, their voices blending in harmonies that would soon fill the ancient walls with music that would be broadcast to billions around the world. Flowers from the royal gardens created displays that honored both British tradition and the couple's personal preferences. Catherine's final moments as a future queen were spent in quiet reflection with her family. Her father, Michael Middleton, ever the steady presence in her life, offered words of encouragement that only a father could provide. Her sister Pippa helped with last-minute adjustments while sharing memories of their childhood that seemed both distant and immediate. The time had come to leave for Westminster Abbey. As Catherine stepped into the morning air, the sound of cheering crowds reached her ears from blocks away. The little girl from Bucklebury, who had once dreamed of ordinary things, was about to become part of a story that stretched back centuries and would continue long after she was gone. Today, she and William would not just receive crowns. They would accept the hopes and dreams of millions of people who looked to them for leadership in an uncertain world. The golden carriage wheels clicked rhythmically against the ancient cobblestones as William and Catherine made their way through London's historic streets. Inside the ornate vehicle, they sat with practiced composure, years of royal training evident in their calm demeanor despite the magnitude of the moment. Through the windows, they could see faces pressed against barriers, hands waving flags, and children perched on shoulders to catch a glimpse of their future monarchs. The crowds lining the processional route had been gathering since before dawn. Margaret Thompson, an 82-year-old grandmother from Yorkshire, had secured a prime spot near Trafalgar Square. She clutched a thermos of tea and a Union Jack that had seen better days, the same flag she had waved during Queen Elizabeth's coronation decades earlier. Her granddaughter Sarah stood beside her, capturing every moment on her phone while trying to absorb the historic significance of what they were witnessing. Street vendors weaved through the crowd selling commemorative items, their voices mixing with the excited chatter of spectators. Ahmed Hassan had traveled from Birmingham with his young family, determined to show his children this moment in British history. His daughter Amira wore a small crown made of cardboard and glitter, her eyes wide with wonder as the procession approached their section of the route. Television commentators positioned at strategic points along the route provided running commentary to millions of viewers worldwide. In broadcasting studios from Tokyo to New York, anchors prepared to cut to the London coverage, understanding that this event would dominate news cycles for days to come. Social media platforms buzzed with real-time updates, photos, and videos as ordinary citizens became instant journalists documenting the historic day. Inside Westminster Abbey, the congregation had taken their seats according to precise protocols developed over centuries. Foreign dignitaries sat alongside British officials, creating a gathering that represented the global reach of the modern monarchy. The President of France exchanged quiet words with the Prime Minister of Canada, while Commonwealth representatives reviewed their ceremonial programs one final time. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood at the altar, his ceremonial robes reflecting the solemnity of the occasion. He had spent weeks studying the ancient texts and traditions that would guide the ceremony, ensuring that every word and gesture honored both historical precedent and contemporary understanding of the monarchy's role. The St. Edward's crown, used for coronations since 1661, rested on the altar beside the other crown jewels that would play their part in the ancient ritual. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis sat with other members of the royal family, their behavior reflecting the careful preparation they had received for this moment. George, old enough to understand that his father was about to become king, watched with serious attention as the events unfolded. Charlotte fidgeted slightly with her dress, while Louis, still young enough to find wonder in the pageantry, looked around the abbey with bright curiosity. The Welsh Guards Band, positioned outside the abbey, played ceremonial music that had accompanied royal processions for generations. Each note carried centuries of tradition. Yet the musicians brought their own skill and dedication to performances they had rehearsed countless times. Their red uniforms and bearskin hats created a visual spectacle that photographers captured for posterity. Catherine's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, sat in positions of honor that would have been unimaginable when their daughter first began dating the future king. Their journey from middle-class business owners to in-laws of the monarch represented a modernization of the royal family that had been evolving for decades. Carol held herself with dignity while her eyes remained focused on her daughter with unmistakable maternal pride. Security personnel, invisible to most observers, maintained constant vigilance throughout the abbey and surrounding areas. Their presence allowed the ceremony to proceed with the openness and accessibility that the couple had requested. Snipers on rooftops, plainclothes officers among the crowds, and sophisticated surveillance systems created layers of protection that enabled this ancient ritual to take place in the modern world. The choir of Westminster Abbey, selected from among Britain's finest voices, stood ready to perform music that ranged from centuries-old hymns to contemporary compositions written specifically for this coronation. Their rehearsals had been meticulous, understanding that their performance would be heard by audiences larger than any previous coronation in history. Outside, the crowds continued to grow as latecomers searched for any available viewing space. Pub owners had opened early, their establishments packed with patrons who preferred to watch the ceremony indoors, while maintaining the communal experience of witnessing history. Street parties had been organized in neighborhoods across London, creating countless smaller celebrations that reflected the diversity of modern Britain. As the golden carriage approached Westminster Abbey, the energy of the crowds reached fever pitch. Police horses pranced nervously as their riders maintained formation, while ceremonial guards stood at attention despite the pressing enthusiasm of spectators. The sound of church bells from across London created a symphony of celebration that mixed with cheers, applause, and the distant sound of military bands. William reached for Catherine's hand as their carriage slowed for the final approach to the Abbey. Years of preparation, months of planning, and a lifetime of training had led to this moment. Through the window, they could see the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey, where kings and queens had been crowned for nearly 1,000 years. Soon, they would join that historic lineage, accepting not just crowns but the responsibility of serving their people in an era of unprecedented global challenges and opportunities. The massive doors of Westminster Abbey swung open as William and Catherine stepped from their golden carriage, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Catherine's coronation gown, with its intricate embroidery representing flowers from across the Commonwealth nations, caught the light streaming through the Abbey's ancient windows. William, resplendent in his ceremonial military uniform, offered his arm to his wife as they prepared to walk down the aisle that had witnessed centuries of royal history. The congregation rose as one, their movement creating a rustling symphony of silk, satin, and ceremonial robes. 2,000 guests turned their attention to the couple who would soon be their king and queen. The moment felt suspended in time, connecting this modern ceremony to countless generations of monarchs who had made this same sacred journey. Television cameras, positioned with meticulous care to capture every angle while respecting the solemnity of the occasion, transmitted the scene to an estimated global audience of 2 billion people. In homes across Britain, families gathered around their televisions, many having prepared special meals and decorations for the occasion. Emma Clark, a teacher from Manchester, had organized a viewing party for her neighbors, complete with homemade scones and tea served in china cups inherited from her grandmother. The processional music, performed by the combined choirs of Westminster Abbey, St. Paul's Cathedral, and the Chapel Royal, filled the vast space with harmonies that seemed to lift the very stones of the building. Each note had been carefully chosen to reflect both the gravity of the moment and the hope for the future that William and Catherine represented. As they walked slowly down the nave, Catherine's eyes briefly met those of her parents. Michael Middleton, the man who had built a successful business from modest beginnings, now watched his daughter prepare to become queen. The emotion in his face reflected the incredible journey their family had taken, from a small village in Berkshire to the most significant ceremony in the British calendar. Commonwealth representatives, wearing the traditional dress of their nations, added splashes of color to the congregation. The High Commissioner of Jamaica sat near the Prime Minister of New Zealand, while delegates from Canada, Australia, and dozens of other nations represented the global family that William and Catherine would soon lead. Their presence transformed the Abbey into a meeting place of cultures and traditions from around the world. The Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward as the couple approached the altar, his voice carrying easily through the Abbey's acoustic perfection. The opening prayers, spoken in words that had consecrated British monarchs for centuries, began the formal transformation of William and Catherine from prince and princess to king and queen. Each syllable carried the weight of tradition, while acknowledging the contemporary world they would serve. Prince George sat between his grandparents, his young face serious as he watched his father prepare for a role he himself would one day inherit. At his age, the full significance of the ceremony might be beyond his complete understanding, but the solemnity of the adults around him conveyed the importance of what was happening. Princess Charlotte, dressed in a miniature gown that echoed her mother's design, occasionally whispered questions to her Aunt Pippa, who provided gentle explanations. The St. Edward's crown, weighing nearly 5 pounds and encrusted with semi-precious stones, rested on the altar beside the other crown jewels. Each piece told its own story of British history: the sovereign's orb representing Christ's dominion over the world, the scepter symbolizing temporal power, and the ring that would bind the new monarchs to their people in an unbreakable covenant of service. Foreign dignitaries observed the ceremony with varying degrees of familiarity with British traditions. The President of France, accustomed to republican ceremonies, found himself moved by the ancient rituals that connected modern Britain to its medieval past. The Emperor of Japan, representing one of the world's oldest continuous monarchies, recognized in the British ceremony echoes of his own nation's imperial traditions. Street parties throughout London and across the United Kingdom transformed the day into a national celebration that extended far beyond Westminster Abbey. In small towns and major cities, communities gathered to mark the historic moment. The Red Lion pub in the village of Great Missenden had been decorated with bunting and flowers, its patrons raising toasts with every significant moment of the ceremony broadcast on the large-screen television that had been installed for the occasion. Security forces maintained their vigilant watch while remaining as invisible as possible. The Metropolitan Police had coordinated with intelligence services from allied nations to ensure the safety of the numerous world leaders in attendance. Their success would be measured not by their visibility, but by the seamless progression of events that allowed the ceremony to unfold without incident. The ancient words of the coronation oath began to echo through the abbey as William prepared to make the promises that would bind him to his role as king. His voice, clear and steady, carried to every corner of the building as he pledged to govern the people according to their laws and customs, to cause law and justice to be executed in all his judgments, and to maintain the Protestant Reformed faith. These were not mere ceremonial words but binding commitments that would shape his reign. Catherine's moment approached as she prepared to receive her own crown. The Queen Consort's crown, created specifically for this ceremony, incorporated elements from previous royal jewelry while establishing its own place in the long history of British regalia. The diamonds that caught the light had been carefully selected not just for their beauty but for their symbolic connection to the Commonwealth nations that would look to her for leadership and inspiration. As the Archbishop raised the crown above Catherine's head, the abbey fell into complete silence. This was the moment when a commoner's daughter would become queen, when years of preparation would culminate in a single gesture that would change her life forever. The weight of the crown as it settled on her head represented not just precious metals and gems, but the expectations and hopes of millions of people around the world. The moment the Archbishop's hands lifted from the crown now resting on Catherine's head, Westminster Abbey erupted in the ancient cry of, "God save the Queen." The words, spoken by 2,000 voices in unison, seemed to shake the very foundations of the building that had witnessed this sacred ritual for nearly a millennium. Television viewers around the world felt the power of the moment through their screens, while those fortunate enough to be present would carry the memory for the rest of their lives. William stood beside his newly crowned queen, the St. Edward's crown gleaming on his own head as he watched his wife complete her transformation. The woman who had once been a university student studying art history was now Queen Catherine, destined to take her place alongside the great queens of British history. The pride in his eyes was unmistakable, mixed with the profound understanding of the journey they would now take together as monarchs. In the congregation, tears flowed freely among family members and friends who had witnessed this remarkable transformation. Pippa Middleton dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, while maintaining the composure expected at such a solemn occasion. The Spencer family, including Diana's brother Earl Spencer, watched with emotions that connected this moment to the memory of William's mother, who would have been so proud to see her son take the throne alongside the woman who had won his heart. The enthronement ceremony began as both William and Catherine were escorted to their thrones, ancient seats that had supported British monarchs through centuries of triumph and challenge. The symbolism was profound. These were not just chairs, but seats of power that connected the new king and queen to an unbroken chain of sovereignty stretching back over 1,000 years. Commonwealth, prime ministers and presidents approached the thrones to pay their respects, each representing nations that spanned every continent and encompassed nearly a third of the world's population. The Prime Minister of India, representing the world's largest democracy, bowed before the couple who would serve as constitutional monarchs in a relationship that had evolved far beyond the colonial era. The ceremony demonstrated how the modern Commonwealth had transformed into a voluntary association of independent nations choosing to maintain their connection to the British Crown. Outside the Abbey, the crowds had swelled to unprecedented numbers as news of the successful coronation spread through social media and traditional broadcasts. Parliament Square overflowed with people waving flags, singing patriotic songs, and sharing the communal joy of witnessing history. Street vendors reported selling out of commemorative items hours before the ceremony concluded, while restaurants and pubs experienced their busiest day in years. The religious elements of the ceremony continued with the presentation of the Bible to the new king, a tradition that emphasized the constitutional role of the monarch as defender of the faith. The Archbishop's words about the importance of spiritual leadership in temporal matters resonated through the Abbey, reminding everyone present that the British monarchy had always been about more than political power. It represented moral and spiritual leadership for the nation. International media outlets scrambled to provide comprehensive coverage for their audiences, each adding their own cultural perspective to the ancient British traditions. French television commentators explained the historical connections between the British and French monarchies, while American networks focused on the fairy tale aspects that had always captivated their viewers. Japanese broadcasters drew comparisons between the British ceremony and their own imperial traditions, highlighting the unique ways different cultures approach monarchical succession. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had maintained remarkable composure throughout the lengthy ceremony, their good behavior reflecting months of preparation by their parents and royal protocol experts. Occasionally, Charlotte would whisper something to her younger brother Louis, who would nod seriously as if receiving important state secrets. Their presence added a touching family dimension to the grand ceremonial proceedings. The moment came for the recognition ceremony, when the congregation formally acknowledged their new sovereigns. The ancient words, "Will you solemnly promise and swear to govern the people of the United Kingdom and the other Commonwealth realms according to their respective laws and customs?" received William's clear affirmation, his voice carrying to every corner of the Abbey and beyond, to the millions watching around the world. Catherine's role in the ceremony evolved as she received the symbols of her position as queen consort. The presentation of her scepter and orb represented her participation in the governance of the realm, while the placement of the ring on her finger symbolized her marriage not just to William, but to the British people themselves. These were not mere symbolic gestures, but sacred commitments that would guide her actions for the rest of her life. Security personnel, who had remained vigilant throughout the ceremony, began preparing for the complex logistics of the procession back to Buckingham Palace. The successful completion of the Abbey ceremony represented only half of their responsibilities for the day. Thousands of people lined the return route, creating both excitement and security challenges that required precise coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies. The final prayers of the coronation ceremony began to echo through Westminster Abbey as the Archbishop prepared to conclude the ancient ritual. His words of blessing for the new king and queen carried centuries of tradition while acknowledging the contemporary challenges they would face. The monarchy that William and Catherine would lead bore little resemblance to the absolute power exercised by medieval kings, but the moral authority and constitutional importance remained as significant as ever. As the ceremony neared its conclusion, the reality of what had just occurred began to settle over the congregation. They had witnessed the peaceful transfer of ultimate constitutional authority, conducted according to traditions that provided stability and continuity in a rapidly changing world. The little girl from Bucklebury was now Queen Catherine, while the helicopter pilot prince had become King William V, ready to lead Britain and the Commonwealth into an uncertain but hopeful future. The golden carriage doors closed behind the newly crowned King William and Queen Catherine as they began their triumphant journey back to Buckingham Palace through streets packed with celebrating crowds. The weight of their crown seemed insignificant compared to the emotional weight of what they had just experienced and the responsibilities they had accepted. Through the carriage windows, they could see faces pressed against barriers, hands reaching toward them, and children lifted high on shoulders to catch a glimpse of their new monarchs. The procession moved at a stately pace, allowing maximum opportunity for the public to see their king and queen, while providing security forces with manageable crowd control. Along the route, professional photographers and amateur enthusiasts alike captured images that would define this historic day for future generations. Margaret Thompson, the elderly Yorkshire grandmother who had secured her prime viewing spot before dawn, waved her weathered Union Jack with tears streaming down her face, her granddaughter recording the moment on her phone while trying to absorb the significance of what they were witnessing. Inside Buckingham Palace, staff members who had been working for months to prepare for the post-coronation celebrations put finishing touches on arrangements that would host world leaders, dignitaries, and family members for the remainder of the day. The state dining room had been set with the finest china and crystal, while the palace kitchens buzzed with activity, as chefs prepared meals fit for the historic occasion. Every detail reflected not just royal protocol but the personal touches that William and Catherine had requested to make their guests feel welcomed. Television. Audiences around the world remained glued to their screens as commentators provided context for the pageantry unfolding in London. In small towns across America, viewing parties had been organized in community centers and church halls, with many attendees wearing their finest clothes in honor of the occasion. Australian pubs opened early to accommodate the time difference, their patrons raising toasts to their new king and queen while proudly displaying Commonwealth flags alongside their national colors. The Royal Air Force had organized a spectacular flyover time to coincide with the royal couple's arrival at Buckingham Palace. Vintage aircraft from World War II flew in formation with modern fighter jets, creating a display that honored both Britain's proud military history and its continued commitment to defense. The sound of the engines mixed with the cheers of the crowds, creating an audio backdrop that television microphones struggled to fully capture. Commonwealth representatives who had attended the ceremony began making their way to various receptions and meetings scheduled throughout the afternoon. The coronation had provided an opportunity, not just for ceremonial recognition of the new monarchs, but for substantive discussions about the future direction of the voluntary association of nations that looked to the British crown as their symbolic head. These conversations would continue over the coming days as delegations extended their visits to London. Street parties throughout Britain reached their peak as communities celebrated with food, music, and entertainment that reflected the multicultural nature of modern British society. In Birmingham, Ahmed Hassan and his family joined neighbors from dozens of different ethnic backgrounds in a celebration that showcased how the monarchy had evolved to represent all citizens regardless of their origins. His daughter Amira, still wearing her homemade cardboard crown, danced with children whose families had lived in Britain for generations. Social media platforms experienced unprecedented traffic as users shared photos, videos, and commentary about the coronation. Hashtags related to the ceremony trending globally, with posts in dozens of languages reflecting the international interest in British royal traditions. Influencers and ordinary citizens alike contributed to a digital conversation that extended the ceremony's reach far beyond traditional media coverage. The newly crowned Queen's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, traveled in a separate carriage, still adjusting to the reality that their daughter was now one of the most prominent women in the world. Their journey from middle-class business owners to parents of the Queen represented a democratization of the monarchy that had been evolving for decades. The pride in their faces was unmistakable as they acknowledged the crowds who cheered not just for their daughter, but for what her story represented about modern Britain. Inside the golden carriage, William and Catherine shared quiet moments of reflection between the waves and acknowledgments required by royal protocol. The magnitude of what they had committed to was beginning to settle in. They were now constitutional monarchs responsible for serving not just Britain, but the Commonwealth realms that looked to the crown for unity and leadership. Their personal relationship, tested by years of public scrutiny, would now face the unique challenges that came with wearing actual crowns. Palace balcony preparations were underway as staff ensured that the famous viewing area would be ready for the traditional appearance of the royal family. This moment, when the new king and queen would step onto the balcony overlooking the Mall, represented the culmination of the day's ceremonies and the first official public appearance of the monarchs in their new roles. The balcony scene would provide the iconic images that newspapers and magazines around the world would feature on their front pages. Security forces began the complex process of transitioning from ceremony protection to ongoing royal security. The successful completion of the coronation represented just the beginning of their responsibilities for protecting the new monarchs. Intelligence assessments, threat evaluations, and protective protocols would all need to be updated to reflect the changed circumstances that came with William and Catherine's new positions. The crowds along the mall had been waiting for hours to secure the best positions for viewing the balcony appearance. Creating a sea of red, white, and blue that stretched as far as the eye could see, vendors moved through the masses selling last-minute commemorative items, while first aid volunteers helped overcome spectators who had been standing in the sun for most of the day. The atmosphere remained festive despite the physical challenges of accommodating so many people in relatively confined spaces. As the golden carriage approached the gates of Buckingham Palace, the reality of the transformation was undeniable. The university students who had met at St. Andrews years earlier were now King William and Queen Catherine, ready to take their place in the long line of British monarchs who had served their people through times of both celebration and crisis. The fairy tale had become reality, but the real work of monarchy was just beginning. The golden carriage came to a gentle stop in the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as King William and Queen Catherine completed their journey from Westminster Abbey as crowned monarchs. Palace guards stood at perfect attention, while household staff waited respectfully to welcome their new sovereigns home. The familiar surroundings took on new meaning, now that William and Catherine were no longer future king and queen but the actual heads of state for the United Kingdom and 15 Commonwealth realms. Staff members who had served the royal family for decades stepped forward to assist with the ceremonial robes and regalia that would be carefully preserved for future generations. The St. Edward's crown, worn by British monarchs only during their coronation, was reverently removed and would return to the Tower of London to join the other crown jewels. Each piece of regalia told its own story of British history, and William and Catherine had now added their chapter to that ancient narrative. The famous balcony of Buckingham Palace had been prepared for what would become one of the most photographed moments in modern royal history. Television cameras positioned at strategic locations captured every detail as the newly crowned king and queen prepared for their first public appearance as monarchs. The balcony, which had witnessed countless historic moments from royal weddings to victory celebrations, would now frame the introduction of William and Catherine to their people as king and queen. Inside the palace, a brief moment of privacy allowed the couple to absorb the magnitude of what had just occurred. Surrounded by portraits of previous monarchs who had faced their own challenges and triumphs, William and Catherine shared words that only they would ever know. The transformation from prince and princess to king and queen had been completed in the eyes of the world. But the personal adjustment to their new reality would continue for months and years to come. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were brought to join their parents for the balcony appearance, their presence adding a generational continuity that reminded observers of the monarchy's ongoing nature. George, now second in line to the throne, walked with new awareness of his destiny, while his younger siblings provided the natural charm that had always endeared the family to the public. Their appearance together represented not just the present moment, but the future of the British monarchy. The doors to the balcony opened, and the roar from the crowd gathered on the mall was unlike anything London had heard in decades. Hundreds of thousands of people had waited for hours to witness this moment, their voices creating a wall of sound that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Union Jacks waved in a sea of red, white, and blue, while smartphones captured images that would be shared around the world within minutes. King William stepped forward first, his hand raised in acknowledgement of the crowd's enthusiasm. The weight of kingship was now fully upon him, but his bearing reflected the years of preparation that had brought him to this moment. Beside him, Queen Catherine smiled and waved with the grace that had made her one of the world's most admired women. Together, they embodied the modern British monarchy's ability to honor tradition while embracing contemporary values. The Royal Air Force flyover, precisely timed to coincide with the balcony appearance, created a spectacular display overhead. Historic aircraft from the Battle of Britain flew alongside modern fighter jets, symbolizing Britain's proud military heritage and ongoing commitment to defense. The sound of the engines mixed with the cheers of the crowd, creating a sensory experience that television and radio could only partially convey to audiences around the world. Television commentators struggled to adequately describe the scene unfolding before their cameras. The combination of pageantry, emotion, and historical significance created a moment that transcended ordinary broadcasting. In homes across Britain and throughout the Commonwealth, families gathered around their screens experienced a shared connection to something larger than themselves, the continuation of traditions that had provided stability through centuries of change. International leaders who had attended the coronation began making their way to various receptions and meetings scheduled throughout the afternoon and evening. The successful ceremony had demonstrated Britain's continued ability to project soft power through cultural traditions that commanded global respect. These diplomatic opportunities would extend the ceremony's impact far beyond the pageantry, influencing relationships and partnerships for years to come. The crowd's enthusiasm showed no signs of diminishing as the royal family remained on the balcony, acknowledging different sections of the gathering and providing photographers with the images that would define this historic day. Children held high on their parents' shoulders waved enthusiastically, while elderly spectators wiped tears from their eyes as they witnessed the continuation of traditions they had followed. Throughout their lives, social media platforms continued to experience unprecedented traffic as images and videos from the balcony appearance spread instantly around the globe. The ceremony that had begun in Westminster Abbey was now being shared, commented upon, and celebrated by millions of people who felt connected to this moment in British history, despite being thousands of miles away from London as the balcony appearance concluded and the royal family retreated into the palace. The crowds on the Mall began to slowly disperse, but the celebration continued throughout London and across the United Kingdom. Street parties would continue into the evening, while pubs and restaurants remained packed with people eager to extend their participation in this historic day. The coronation of King William and Queen Catherine was complete, but their reign was just beginning. The ancient ceremony had successfully transferred constitutional authority to a new generation, while maintaining the traditions that provided continuity and stability. The university students who had fallen in love at St. Andrews had completed their transformation into the constitutional monarchs of a modern Britain, ready to lead their nation and the Commonwealth into an uncertain but hopeful future. The world had indeed stood in awe as William and Catherine stepped into their roles as king and queen, but the true measure of their reign would be determined not by the magnificence of their coronation, but by their service to the people who had entrusted them with the crown. The ceremony was ending, but the real work of monarchy was just beginning.